need to take this little picture off, and you will be able to see us. And there we are. Hi.
Hi.
So, who is in the room already? I think I saw Dale say hello. Hello, Dale. Good to see you over there. And we've got 8 other people in the room, and I know more will be coming in soon. So please do say hello. And of course, Mary is here. Mary, how are you
Hey,
doing?
John, I'm good. I'm doing good.
Good
How
to
are
see
you
you.
doing? Tell me how you feel.
I'm fine. I'm fine. Just a little foggy in the brain, but that's not too unusual for me. And Mary, not Mary, but Crystal is our guest today, and she's a friend of Mary's, and it's so nice to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's always nice to have a guest, and you might not know what to expect, but basically, you'll share your story of recovery, and we'll just let a conversation flow from that. It's kind of like an AA meeting in a way. It's like an AA meeting slash party slash podcast where people will heckle you during your talk and ask you questions and comment and talk while you're talking, that kind of thing. But it's a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, except the
Um,
heckle part.
except for the heckle part, and we might occasionally have to throw somebody out of the room anyway.
So there will be crosstalk.
There possibly could very well be.
There
So
could very
there's
well be.
LaDon, and there's John, and there's Drew. Good to see y'all out there. Anyway, I'm happy to be up and talking after having COVID for a week, and to see everybody. So why don't we begin? Crystal, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Crystal, and I am a grateful recovering human being, as well as a grateful recovering person in recovery, and also a grateful recovering alcoholic. I have all those titles, and today I'm happy that I actually am able to say these things and feel comfortable in my own skin. So. Being asked to share my story, I'm really glad that I didn't have a lot of time to prepare because given a lot of time to prepare, I probably would have allowed fear to step in and run me straight out of the room and send me saying a million reasons why I couldn't show up. But given the short time, I think it was good for me because it required that I just come here and have exactly what you're saying, a conversation about my recovery experience. So I think it's a good place to start is to start where I grew up. I grew up in Germany. Some people who are military or prior military might be familiar with Hahn Air Force Base that's no longer there, but is now Ryanair flies out of that airport. And many of us grew up in that small Air Force community. And the thing for me about growing up overseas is unlike America, when you want to get a drink or you want to go drinking, nobody cards you. Nobody asks you how old you are. Nobody cares how old you are. If you have the nerve to step up to the bar, step up to the counter, order that drink, they are going to serve you. They don't care if you're 13, they don't care if you're 12, you're going to get served. And for me, my journey in drinking started when I was 13. And it's kind of funny because I think my mom was thinking that it would be a good idea to send me along with my brother, who's 3 years older than me, because he was going out to, in the old days, they were called discotheques. And so he was going out to a discotheque. And my mom said, well, you go along with your brother. And I think her idea behind that was that if my brother had to look after me, he wouldn't get drunk. But what ended up happening was I ended up getting drunk, blackout drunk, and my brother and a few of his friends ended up having to get me home. And I remember my brother and I could talk across our rooms, and I remember telling him, Joe, the floor, the whole room's spinning. He goes, put your foot on the floor, and that's to a 13-year-old. And the thing is the next day at school, all of my other 13-year-old friends who had been out at this discotheque and who had been drinking, and who gotten drunk, they were all going, ugh, that was horrible. I will never do that again. But you know what I was thinking? I can't wait till I can do that again. And that for me is that something inside of me that set off in which for now, what I know is that that feeling of not wanting to feel, I have never been a just one drinker. I have never, even, in early recovery, when I would try to sit around and romanticize about sitting across the table and having a glass of wine, that was not my reality. That was not my reality because that is not how I drank. The way that I drank was to black out. Every time I picked up a drink, there was one thing that you could be sure of is that I was going to get drunk. And growing up, my mom was always real even keel. She didn't have extreme highs. She had some lows, but they weren't extreme, but she just was kind of an evil killed woman. And so I would be trying to talk to her and she would just be in this zone of evil, even killness. And so I found out the way to get my mom to listen to me is I had to be over the top. My mother didn't pay attention to me until I was on the floor, rolling around, kicking and screaming and crying. And then she would pay attention to me. And so then later in life, she would say, "You're my emotional child." And I'm like, I guess I am, and to some degree, I feel that as I look back on this, that I was her emotional child. Because when I think about my brother, I would describe my brother as having the nerves of steel or Job's, the patience of Job.
Mm.
Because my brother is calm. He's a lot like my mom, even killed. But I'm the one that you can say one thing and I'm off and running. And so for me, being that emotional vacuum and feeling so much, alcohol taught me that I didn't have to feel. When I got drunk, I didn't, all those feelings I had, all that stuff rushing at me when I was drunk, I didn't feel it. So for a while, that worked for me. It worked for me. I can remember, it's, I've had a problem, as I've said, since I started drinking at 13 and I drank my way through high school. There were very rarely games that I hadn't drank before, and I definitely drank after. There were rarely games that I didn't have a hit of hash because we grew up overseas. Marijuana was not accessible, so we did hash. So, the Coke can bent down and made our own personal bongs is how I got high, and whether it was volleyball, basketball, whether it was gearing up for track, I had my liquid courage. I had what it was going to take to get me through what those events were, and I can remember my best friend in high school saying, "I'm not going on senior class trip with you guys." And I was like, "What's the big problem?" She goes, "Because all you guys are going to do is get drunk. You're just going to get drunk." And I remember looking at her thinking, "Of course we are. Isn't that what everybody does?" And she stuck to her boundary. She didn't go. And for a long time in high school, she and I didn't talk. We didn't talk because I was so angry at her because I couldn't believe she dared not to go with us, all of us that were going to be drinking and doing whatever else we were going to be doing on senior class trip. And so for me, I drank my way through high school. And then I want to talk about this phenomenon of that alcohol is a progressive disease, because I had an interesting college experience and an interesting relationship with alcohol when I got to college, which was once I got to college, I met up with this girl in the lobby who said, "Hey, do you want to go to this campus event?" And it was a religious campus event. And they were Christian campus crusaders, might be a good way to put them. And I hooked up with this religious organization that later was described as having cult-like tendencies. So it was never defined as an actual cult, but cult-like tendencies. And that worked for me because the very night that I had the opportunity to go to a drinking party or go to this religious event, I went to this religious event. And so what ended up happening for me through college was that this cult-like, group kind of consumed you. It consumed everything you did. They made decisions about who you hung out with, where you went, passing out literature on campus, 2 and 3 stepping people, sharing the Bible, sharing it. And, the only time I then could get drunk is I had to get away from them. So my biggest blackout drinking then became when I would go home back to Germany during Christmas time. I would go home at Christmas time. I would stay drunk the whole vacation, blackout drinking the whole time. I would go to my godparents all the way across to DC during the summers, where I would stay drunk the whole summer, and then I'd go back to school, and then I'd be back that person trying to, control my drinking. But it's a progressive disease. The other thing that happened to me when I was in college, because I had a partial scholarship, the athletic scholarship that was built on, coming out of Germany and my coach having videotaped me, it was the 80s. And it was the beginning when they were just starting to do drug testing and just starting to, where you couldn't be on the court drunk or high. And the problem for me and the challenge for me is that's when I played the best. That's when I feared the best. Is I could be out there and I could be high and I wasn't afraid that, I'm a big girl, having those extra hips, having those extra thighs, I looked like everybody else to me when I was under the influence. And so, when they take that away from you, then when they took it away from me, my ability to perform was also lost. So for me, one of the things is when you're in not a cult, but an organization that has cult-like tendencies, and you want to get away, I had to go all the way to DC to get away. Wow. And so that's what I did. And that's how I got out of this organization that was controlling what I did. But having a personality of extremes, when I got to DC, my godmother introduced me to what she thought were these nice sorority girls, and in DC, to be in your 20s, for me, that set off again that phenomenon of craving. And I drank and I used everything under the sun, and to the point that my godparents sat down with me and they said, we literally think that you're going to kill yourself. And because I remembered a time when I first started to live with them and they would call me playfully the baby alcoholic, and that was playful, right? To this point over time that they now are sitting down saying, we're worried about you. We're worried about you. So again, this is a progressive disease. And so because these people that I loved and I was living in their home, I pulled back. And I went and I started to be that weekend warrior where I would start drinking and using on Thursdays, and I would drink and use all over the weekend. And then Sundays were about sobering up. And I could do that for a while until I couldn't do it anymore. And I'm also a pretty good runner. And so I left there and I ran to Virginia. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I, under the guise that I'm going to go work on my master's degree, and I got there. And what continued to happen is I continued to drink. And I continued to have consequences for my drinking. And I used to say that my first experience with AA was in 1995 until I started working the steps. And when I started working the steps, I realized, no, you've been to AA before. When I was doing my step work, I remembered I had gone to court because I was working in a multi-generational substance abuse program, working with children and families, and I'd have to go to court. And I showed up at court one day and the judge looked at me and he said, Miss Malloy, you do realize that it's not okay for you to show up in my court drunk or smelling like alcohol. And I'm like, all right. And so that was my first experience of getting my white slips. So, I got my white slips where I would go to AA meeting and and in Virginia, they were a huge meeting, 100 people in the room. And the old timers, which I didn't know they were old timers at the time, I just thought they were people who were in charge. They'd sit around a table and, they'd pass the basket around to all of us who weren't around the table to drop our white slips in. And I would sit in the back of the room and I'd do my grocery list. That was my first experience at AA. And so it's not a shocker that I didn't remember anything and I didn't remember going there, because I wasn't going for me. I was going to check that box so that, I could keep my job. And, and I was able to hold on to a series of jobs because people thought I had potential and they liked me. And I didn't realize at the time potential meant stop drinking. Get your life in order. You're screwing up. I didn't know that that's what that meant. I just thought potential meant, I hadn't figured out quite how to manage my alcoholism. I didn't, because I knew I had a problem with alcohol. I'd been told that since I was in high school, but I just didn't know how to manage it yet. I hadn't figured out the secret. How do you do this? And so, once again, when things got hot and heavy and a boss was getting ready to fire me, I found a way to get back to Germany. And there again, thinking that, my drinking would get better, it got worse. And it was also in Germany where I was able to come to Alcoholics Anonymous. And how that happened is after a heavy night of drinking, once again, now I'm working in the school system, working again in an adolescent substance abuse, counseling program. I have my master's degree. I'm working in the school. I'm showing up at school in the same clothes I had on the night before, because there had been a storm. There'd been an ice storm. And so I needed to go pick up my mom and drop her off at her school and then go to my school. And when I went through the gate, the guy who took my ID card, he was like probably 18, 19 years old. I could see the look on his face because the alcohol and the smell of alcohol must have gushed out at him when I rolled down the window. And he didn't say anything. He just handed me back my ID. And I went to work, and I got to work. And I'm, again, in the same clothes I had on the night before. I'm getting ready to start call kids into my office, or I'm going to work with these kids. And my office had a bathroom. And I went into the bathroom. And I guess I was getting ready to try to clean myself up. And I looked in the mirror. And it was the first time in years that I think I'd actually looked in the mirror. And when I looked at the person looking back at me, I realized I didn't know that person. And the big book talks about that incomprehensible demoralization. That was my moment. That was my moment that I realized that I had a problem, and I had a problem that I wanted to do something about. And so I had a colleague, because, it's a substance abuse program, and she took me to my first AA meeting. And it was my first AA meeting that I went to, not because somebody sent me there with my white slips, but because I knew that that's where I needed to be. And, my first sponsor, and I was co-sponsored by a couple. And so my first sponsor in this program is deceased, but her partner is still living. And but my first sponsor, I got sober in Germany on my bathroom floor with them holding my hair back and me throwing up and going through detox. And with them saying to me, "I'll see you tomorrow," And I did 90 and 90, not because somebody told me to do 90 and 90. I did 90 and 90 because I had a sponsor and co-sponsors that just said to me, "I'll see you tomorrow. And I'll see you tomorrow." And that's how it happened, And it wasn't until much later that this God thing started coming up for me. Because I was in such pain when I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. My life was out of control. The shame was overwhelming. Being in a very small community was very difficult. Military communities are so small, and everybody knows everybody. And people knew I had a problem with alcohol. But I think, again, that potential, somebody just thought at some point I was going to grow up and figure it out. So I was a young person when I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was still in my 20s. And so the God thing. So my sponsor, she was so funny. One of my co-sponsors, one of the things she said was, "I want you to get down on the ground. I want you to blow on that leaf and keep blowing. Because do you have the ability to make that leaf fall from that tree and blow across the ground? If not, then you're not the higher power. You need to find a higher power." And so I went for years through all the different things: good orderly direction, a group of drunks. The group was my higher power. I tried to believe in the God that my mother grew up on, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I used to share my story that I knew the exact moment that I stopped believing in God. And I realized because of the secular program and getting the opportunity to rework my steps in a secular way, that I had stopped believing long before I thought I'd stopped believing.
Mm.
You know, I had stopped believing because I am a sexual abuse survivor, and my abuser is my father, who's still alive today. And I remember being in the bathroom and the water was running for bath time, and my dad used to give me baths. And I remember praying to this non secular God to save me, for my mom to walk in, for my brother to walk in, for anybody to walk in. And it never happened. No one ever walked in. And so, this idea that you can pray to God and God can save you, I realized then that's not the God that needed to save and be with me in recovery, because that God I doubted. That God I doubted. And I've tried over the years to say, but you're seeing God through the eyes of that 5-year-old, that 6-year-old. But then you know what? I continue to see and experience circumstances in which that God I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand that God. And in recovery, it was getting so difficult because God is riddled through the steps. And
Mhm.
sponsors are telling me, you've got to find a higher power. You've got to have a higher power. But for me, it was painful. It was painful to see what my mother went through with my father and and have that particular God not show up. you know and then having people in recovery or people who, as I got older, just tell me things, well, you're just not believing hard enough, or the one that came to me that was so difficult was a family member telling me that I needed to forgive my father.
Yeah.
That was my problem, and when was I going to let go of it? And for me, I let go of it when I decide to let go of it, not when somebody tells me it's time to let go of it. So what that did for me in the rooms of recovery and why it hurt so bad in traditional AA is that I kept thinking it was my problem, that it was my fault, that was something was wrong with me because I didn't believe the God that everybody else believed. This judo Christian, God, that I needed to believe in that God for it to be right. Even though I was getting this dual message that your higher power could be a doorknob, your higher power could be a group of drunks, good orderly direction. People were saying that, but people were also telling me if I tried to say that that's not the God I believe in, that it wasn't good enough. So I was getting that mixed message. Yeah, group of drunks. But now that you're a mature, you now have been in recovery 10 years, it can't continue to be the group. At some point, you have to mature and it has to be, and it's like, okay, why are you telling me what I have to do? I'm telling you this is working. So, you fast forward to now having, I got sober in 1995. And so having, 27 years going into 28 years of recovery, I've stayed sober without that being my higher power. My higher power is my higher power. And I don't have to explain or justify my belief to anyone. But I didn't know that until I got to the secular rooms. And, secular AA has been around. Somebody was saying some of the first women's secular meetings came out in the 70s or something like that. I didn't even hear about secular meetings until I stumbled into a New Freedoms group women's meeting that I go to now. I didn't even know what that meant. But what I felt was a freedom, a new freedom. What I felt was I could say I am a grateful, recovering human being, and somebody wasn't criticizing me because I wasn't using the word alcoholic. I could just be a woman in recovery, and that would be enough, and it would be okay. It would be okay. And so, if I choose to say, hi, I'm Crystal and I'm an alcoholic, I choose to say it. And I can say it today or I cannot say it today. If I choose to go to my mom's church where they're amening and dancing across the room and falling out, and praising God, I'm okay with that. I love them and I'm glad that God does that for them. And I'm not going to begrudge anybody that's their faith and that does it for them and they have peace and joy believing that way. It just didn't work for me. It just didn't work for me. I feel closest to my higher power when I'm out here at the lake and I'm walking down to the water and the trees are blowing and I'm sitting on the dock and I'm surrounded by my dogs and the water is moving in and out and the sky is whatever color it is. My higher power is talking to me and I can feel it, so I can feel it in certain rooms. I felt it this morning in the AA meeting that we had, the secular meeting we had this morning. Oh my gosh, the spirit was alive and moving through that room this morning. So, I can have my needs met in a variety of ways that don't require that my higher power be, God, whom I choose to call Jesus Christ, which if you're in the South, you will hear that in meetings. Yeah. You will hear that. And, and lots of meetings end with the Lord prayer, and I have learned to be comfortable wherever I'm comfortable. There's no judgment. And I have found that I love secular meetings, that I feel comfortable here. I feel honored here. I feel that I truly can believe what I believe and not be judged for it. So I'm a youngin in secularism, which is why you heard more of my beginning story than the end. But so I've only been coming to secular meetings for about 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years. But I'm not going away. I'm not going to stop coming here. I'm not going to stop participating, but I'm also not stop participating in traditional AA either. That has a place in my life as well. It's about balance for me, but it is here that I feel at home. So with that, that's my story. I don't know how long I talked.
That's
Probably
fantastic.
a bit longer
Thank you.
than 20 minutes, but
Thank you so much.
That's awesome.
Thank you, Crystal. I really did enjoy that. Thank you so much. Very, very inspiring. What I was thinking off the top of my head as you started going into the God thing was there's a lot of good with AA for sure, and so I'm really glad that there's the freedom for these groups to have secular meetings because it just takes a lot of the confusion and mystery out of recovery and lets people just do what you're really supposed to do, in my opinion, and that's find your own way. And you've done such a great job of that. So I'm glad that you found those rooms and that you're part of this. So
And
thank you so much.
I'm really glad you found these rooms, and we're all better for it. And that was a beautiful way to tell your story. It was inspiring, and I felt moved to tears at your honesty and the way that you just shared your truth. Yeah. Which is what I was also feeling in the meeting this morning. It's like, once someone shares their truth, then it gives permission for other people to also be intimate in that way, which was sort of the title of what we were discussing today was intimacy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's when you share that, I come to realize because people will come to that particular meeting, that New Freedom meeting, and sometimes they'll say, I feel like I'm at a real adult meeting, or I'm at this higher meeting where, and it's like, yeah, I understand why people feel that way because in many traditional AA meetings, you hear a lot of parroting. Yep. You hear a lot of 90 meetings in 90 days. If you don't find a higher power, you're going to drink. You just hear a lot of parroting of a certain thing. So after a while, you can ultimately tell other people's story. But at this particular meeting, because it's a deeper level of honesty and how women share so openly, then it's not parroting. It truly is people sharing their own experience, whether that is, I'm going to go to church after I leave this meeting, right. Or if whatever it is, So it makes a big difference as opposed in traditional AA when there are times when you would be very uncomfortable saying, I'm going to a Wiccan group when I leave
Right.
here.
Right.
Exactly.
Or,
Yep.
I'm going to go get my crystals and,
Yep.
sit out in the garden. And, that there's a level of, I have to hold that piece back in
Yes.
order to participate. Whereas where we are in the secular meeting, you don't have to hold that back. You want to
No.
go to church when you leave us? Go. If you want to go burn candles and put on black fingernail polish, go do it.
Yes.
And so that's why I believe people feel that it's a higher place because you're able to be who you are. You're not hiding who you are.
Right. And that's what I think is so wonderful about secular recovery is you can be 100% you and it's all good. It's all good. And thank goodness for the people that helped bring the secular movement into AA. I truly am grateful for them. And I'm here to sort of promote that.
Yeah.
I'm giving it back so that maybe other people can find it here too.
Crystal, you also mentioned that there's still a place for traditional AA for you, and I found that too for me, but it took me a while. I guess I had a bad experience in a way with my old home group when I came out as an atheist. So when I left that group and started a secular meeting, I just never went to any regular traditional meetings. I just wasn't comfortable there. And it's really just been the last year that I started attending some traditional meetings, and I've been comfortable there. And I guess the meetings I've gone to have not been pushing me in any direction. People haven't been talking about Jesus or anything like that. It hasn't been too overtly religious. If it were really dogmatic, I probably would feel uncomfortable and not be there. But there is a place for that. I kind of like having a diverse group of people in my life. And so I don't really mind hearing from someone who has a more spiritual perspective and so forth. And it's not that bad for me to be around that. So, but it took me a while to get comfortable with that again. It sure did. Oh, also the group I go to, they don't read how it works and they don't do the Lord's Prayer. And that makes a big difference.
It does.
Yes.
It does make,
I can
especially
imagine.
the Lord's Prayer part.
Yeah. I mean, that puts a tenor to the meeting. That's just crazy. Anyway.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. I think what caused that for me is that my mother passed away right at the beginning of the pandemic. She passed away April 28th of 2020. So we were just coming out of lockdown. I mean, and so we had been locked down, and she had passed. And when I went to view her body for the last time, nobody had figured any of this stuff out yet. Zoom, which we do so eloquently now,
Right.
barely existed. And so when somebody gave me different links, because here's the thing that traditional AA gave me is by going to meetings, I got to watch what happens to people when they have major life crisis and not drink. And one of the things I repeatedly saw and heard from people who had time in the program is no matter what happened to them, they didn't drink and they went to meetings. I just saw it. I saw it growing up in traditional AA. So when my mother passed, I knew don't drink and go to meetings. And we're in the early stages of a pandemic, which we weren't even calling it a pandemic yet. We were just calling it lockdown, and somebody was just telling us it was all going to go away in April. But so that was happening for us as a society. So I knew don't drink, go to meetings. Okay. Somebody handed me a meeting to this Harlem group, this Zoom link. Somebody told me about going to the secular meeting. Everybody was handing me these links to go to meetings. And I just knew, go to these meetings. And I just started going to them, and it was saving me. It was keeping me from going into this deep, dark depression. It was allowing me to deal with what was going on with my mom. I was having commitments to show up at certain places on certain days and certain times when we were locked down, when the only place we could go was to and from work. That was it. And that was 2 years ago. And already people's memory of that is fading.
Agreed. Yep.
But during that time, we had nothing, guys. We had nothing. We were in our homes with our families, with just our computers, and that was it. And so going to some of those traditional meetings, I just had to go. I knew I wasn't going to drink. I didn't want to kill myself. And, and I wanted to have some sense of being grounded. So whether it didn't matter who or what they were doing, I was just going there to stay alive. And so I think that's why I was able to have a little bit more balance, because I was desperate.
Yeah.
I like Bobbert's comment here. Bobbert said that their therapist suggested once that they go to meetings for the recovery, not necessarily the AA. I think
Mm,
that's a pretty good
mm,
recommendation, because they're, you know,
yeah,
honestly, I think that the strength of AA has always been the personal stories of the people in the room who I could relate to, and who I felt
mhm,
were in my corner. So, and also later in life, after I got my feet on the ground, is watching other people get their feet on the ground and watching them
mhm.
change and transform. That has always helped me as well. So yeah, go for the recovery. Don't worry so much about the other stuff.
Love
Yeah.
it.
Just to get out of your
Yeah.
own head and to be around other human beings
Yeah.
Mhm.
helps me totally. That's why I do it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
And that's
tell
go
Mm.
us
ahead.
now, as your how you've reached out to a lot of people. I know that because I've seen people that come into the rooms because of you, and I really appreciate that about you. And I also appreciate that you give permission to people to be themselves the way you
Yeah.
feel that you describe secular AA gives you permission to be yourself. And I really appreciate that about you. And I'm just glad you're part of my home group.
Yeah. It's, one of the things you had asked me about is being a therapist and being in the field, and being, in recovery as well. You know, for me is even when I have people that I see as patients, I don't hide that aspect
Hmm.
of who I am. If I know somebody is struggling with addiction, I point it out. And I point it out, because I struggled with addiction. I share. And sometimes I end up in meetings with people that are also patients. And I'm just not going to hide. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to hide. I did that, in terms of my sexuality. I did that in terms of my family. I did that in so many other areas. My relationship, hiding in the closet, being in a military community, going through don't ask, don't tell, and having to hide who you are. I don't want to live my life that way today, and so I don't live my life that way with patients and people I work with either. You know, um, in fact, one of my patients is how I got to the secular meeting is because we were talking about AA meetings, and she told me, "Hey." Because she's Buddhist, and she said, I found this really cool meeting that I think maybe you'll enjoy. And I said, "Thank you." Took that link and showed up. you know,
Yep.
so I'm yeah, I can't keep it. I can't keep it, regardless of being in this field. I don't find it necessary. I don't want to beat anybody over the head with it, but I also am not going to hide from it. I'm not going to hide from it. I'm not going to hide from sharing the truth and my truth.
Hmm.
And if somebody's at a meeting and I'm crying and I'm upset and I'm hurting, and they happen to either know I'm a therapist or have seen me at some point, well, too bad, so sad. I mean, I know other therapists decide they want to do it differently. They won't go to meetings where they might have clients or whatever. I've always been in too small a community to play that game.
Yeah.
I just,
Yep.
if I had done that in Europe, I wouldn't have been going to meetings.
Yep. Right.
We were one big group that just met on different days.
Yep.
So,
Gotcha.
and same thing, Savannah. Savannah is extremely
Oh yeah.
small.
Very small.
I would have to duck and hide. It would have to be I'd have to be really creative to avoid, people, because I have a pretty thriving practice. And so I'd have to really, and I'm just not willing to do that.
Yeah.
If you see me crying, you see me crying,
Yeah.
you know, um, yeah.
Yep. I've talked to someone this week that has pretty much long-term sobriety, and they still were very closed-chested about their involvement in recovery, and
Hmm.
just didn't feel comfortable for people knowing. And
Hmm.
it helped me realize that I don't put it on my bumper sticker, but I don't care if anybody knows I'm in recovery. It doesn't bother me
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
all, because I feel like it's just a part of who I am, and I'm not uh, fearful that it would hurt me in any way if anybody found out. I'm glad don't have that particular thing where I'm worried about someone finding out for some whatever reason, because I
I've
think recovery is different now. It used to be a stigma, and I
Hmm.
think that has
Hmm.
changed. Hopefully.
I have struggled with how open I should be about it at work.
Hmm.
I, I think that my workplace is very open-minded and welcoming of people and so forth. And if I did come out openly to the wider workforce, I guess I would be accepted just fine. And they do encourage that. And I've been considering maybe doing something along those lines, but I have become more open just with coworkers and so forth when it's appropriate. So if somebody's
Hmm.
talking about a family member who's got a drinking problem or something like that, and I can relate or have resources available for them, I will. Or if I'm telling my boss I'm going to do something, I'm going to tell her, yeah, I'm going to go to an AA conference. I will tell her that, I'm going to go do something like that. I don't mind just being open like that. And but it's just been very recently that I've been able to do that. And it's given me a bit of a freedom that it kind of brings me into just being one person. I don't have to be a separate person here and there. But I
Right.
haven't taken it to, outside my little work group to the greater world out there. And there's an opportunity for me to do that, especially with September as being the National Recovery Month, and it's a great time for people to come out if they want to and let the rest of the world know that, hey, I am in recovery. A lot of people are in recovery. It's really okay. No stigma about it. So anyway,
Mm.
I'm not quite there yet, but I'm working towards it and thinking about it. But man, it's crazy. I've been sober for a long time, and still I just kind of keep that part of me pretty
Hmm.
close.
Yeah. Well, there's the whole anonymity part. I think that was ingrained in me for my whole life.
Yeah.
What you
Mhm.
see here, who you see here, let it stay here. Like, just, you know, like the first time I saw some people from my old home group on TV on a city hall meeting where they said, I'm in recovery and I
Yeah.
just thought, clutch my pearls. I couldn't believe they were doing that. I was like, what the, like in my growing up in the rooms, it was just ingrained that you just didn't do that. You just
Yeah.
didn't come out and say, I'm in AA. It was just like,
Same.
yeah.
And when
And
I first did this
yeah,
podcast for a long time, it was like totally anonymous, no video, none of that stuff. And then
right.
over time, I if I made the slightest infraction on the anonymity rule, someone would jump all over me. And I finally said, you know what? Enough of that. I'm gonna, I don't have to follow your rules or your traditions if I don't want to. And so I decided not to be anonymous like on the podcast. So I can just be whoever I am there. And if anybody finds me there, that's fine. I'm okay
Mhm.
with that. But yeah, it was important for me to do that. But then I also had to make sure that people knew that, this is a podcast about recovery, not necessarily about AA. AA is one thing that we'll talk
Right.
about, but
Yeah.
it's a recovery podcast. And
Right.
Right.
About all
anyway,
things recovery.
but I
Yes.
respect anyone's right to be whoever they want and as far in their privacy and so forth like that.
It's so funny. This rings true for me because in earlier today in the women's meeting, what I talk about is balance, right? If I'm living in the extremes on either side, so if I do have the bumper sticker and I'm running down the street screaming and yelling, I'm in the AA, jumping on every TV station
Right.
screaming AA, there's a problem. But I
Right.
also think there's a problem if I tried to pretend like I'm not an
Right.
alcoholic and I'm not. It's a balance. It's about balance. It's about finding that spot, that little spot where you can be at times a little uncomfortable because the pendulum is swinging in this nice balance where you're going to get a little ooh, but you're not going to jump out of your shorts, right? So anything for me done on either side of the extremes, it's too much. That's when I know
Yep.
I'm in trouble. So yeah, so I do share, but I don't have the bumper sticker.
Right.
You know?
Same. 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 Yeah, if anybody were to stumble across the YouTube channel from work, I'd say, yeah, that's me. But the funny thing is they won't unless they're actually searching for it. That's so interesting about the internet too, especially, if you do a YouTube channel, the only people that are going to find you are the people that are looking for you, that it shows up on the algorithm. Otherwise they're going to be watching something else they're interested in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But I certainly haven't told my family members the name of the podcast. I mean, I
no,
I definitely oh no, I don't want I do keep that separate. Like, yeah. I'm here every Saturday, but I would never give anybody in my family a way to find me.
Whereas I, on the other hand, but I think that's the true freedom, and I was thinking about this other traditional group, the one in Harlem that I go to, the KISS group. There's a guy in there who says, and I think he has 36 years. He goes, "We don't want you to say what you hear here and what is said here, leave it here." He says, "No, we want you to take it with you. Just that when it comes to talking about who you saw here, I don't want you to say you saw me here."
Right.
Right? But
Right.
he said, "I want you to take it with you." And I think that's a powerful message as well, because we don't want to just be recovered in the rooms,
Right.
right?
Right.
We want to
Very
live
true.
outside the rooms. We want
Yes.
to take the things that we learn in the rooms, what we learn in secular, the things that I've learned there, I take with me outside because they're powerful for me. So I think, and that's in a traditional meeting that he says, take it with you. We want you to take it with you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I agree 100%. Plus, we don't just live in these rooms. The whole point for me in recovery is to live in the bigger world, comfortable in my own skin. Yep.
Yeah.
And I've always found, even in the beginning when I started off in recovery in the rooms of traditional AA a long time ago, there's a little thing in the big book that talks about, that describes the program as a practical program of action. And I've always kind of hung on to that, even though that there were people like in your case, Crystal, that were telling me that eventually, I would have a God and all this kind of stuff. And maybe I even pretended like I did have one, but I always did see some practical aspects to it. And that really came out though when I stopped using the original language of the steps and started putting them in my own words. Then I could really see how practical and experiential they really were. They weren't magic, and they were just a part of how I just decided to live my life, I guess, at a certain point. So some people might not see value in putting those steps in their own vocabulary, but I do, and I have always found that helpful, and I think that was one of the biggest things that I got from discovering secular AA meetings. Is I learned that a lot of the problem that I had with AA was just the way that people were describing the same experience. They were just using religious terminology and so forth, and that helped me to understand that, well, I don't have to talk like them. I can talk in my own way.
Yes. Yes. I felt like it almost became like the parroting thing. Like you had to parrot all the right stuff to be included in the group in the right way. And it was more about being included in the group than it was finding your own path.
Well, I did that. And Crystal, I grew up as an army brat, and I lived overseas in the Netherlands, when I was in grade school, and we moved around a lot. So I always attributed my fitting into AA, from my army brat ways. I could just learn that, okay, this is a different weird culture. I'm not familiar with it, but I can learn to adapt. And that's exactly what I did with AA. So a lot of the parroting I did was like, okay, I'm in a new environment here. I understand how they're talking. I'm going to start doing it that way to be accepted. I did that for a really long time until I realized that I just couldn't do that anymore.
Right. Right. And didn't want to do it anymore.
Didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. Didn't want to do it anymore. Yeah. I felt the same thing. Like I can't keep doing this over and over again. There has to be a different way here that includes all people, not just believers, quote unquote. Yeah.
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 Well, if anybody would like to call in, we do have the phones open. It's 844-899-8278.
And hey, Sheila Smith, glad you're here.
Is that another Savannah person?
No, I don't know her. I don't know her, but I'm glad you're here.
Well, hi, Sheila. Good to see you. Yeah,
I don't know
if I've seen you.
Oh,
Sheila.
you know her. Okay, cool. Gotcha.
I know her from living overseas. I know her from a lot of different places. So good to see her.
How nice to have friends. Well, if we've pretty much covered everything, there's no need for us to continue on. Mary, do you have any news on the secular AA convention front?
Well, we're still meeting every weekend to confirm speakers and groups, and it will be the October 29th and 30th, a Saturday and a Sunday, from somewhere around 9 a.m. to midnight, so that we can get everybody in Europe and Asia and everywhere else in their time zones to be able to participate. We do have a good lineup. We do have a great committee. And once again, feel free to contact me if you have any ideas for a panel that you'd like to see, or any speakers or topics that you'd like to talk about. I think we're kind of, this weekend, we're kind of narrowing it down. And also, if you'd like to volunteer to be part of the virtual conference to help the flow of that, feel free to let me know that. And you can put my email up there, John, if you want to, for anyone to contact me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're also going to do a live stream at the conference.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Sorry. I think I have COVID brain. I totally forgot that part. We've been graciously asked to have our regular podcast as part of the virtual conference. So we'll be live at the conference. Cool. Yeah. On that Saturday, the 29th, we'll be live at the conference. So come on down. Fun. Yeah. We'll have to figure out what we're going to do, John.
Yeah, I know. We'll figure something out, I guess.
Yeah.
We'll try to plan it out maybe and see how that works out.
We'll try to see what we're going to, we'll have to figure it out. So probably be a lot more people there that day. Yeah.
Well, Crystal, it was really nice to meet you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It was just an honor to have you on, and your story was inspiring, and I know that everybody enjoyed it. So thank you so very much.
Yes, awesome.
You're so welcome, and thank you. I appreciate being here, and it's so nice to be invited somewhere rather than disinvited. So thank you for inviting me today.
Thanks, you did a great job.
And speaking of discotheques, the 1970s was my favorite time. Y'all take care. Be well. It was real lot of fun. We'll be back next week with another live stream. Bye-bye, all.